Timothy Wayne Coggins was born August 29, 1960, in Griffin, Georgia. His niece Heather describes him as a fun-loving person who was a dancer and entertainer, who loved playing with his niece and nephew. She described him as being just a fun uncle. When Timothy was younger, he got hit by a car and almost died, but made a full recovery. But because of that, he got a lot of attention. And Timothy had a very close relationship with his mother. But even during the 1980s, people in Griffin, Georgia still hung their Confederate flags up in their yard. The KKK would even march in parades. But everything would be fine as long as the blacks stayed on their side of the tracks and the whites stayed on theirs. You didn't intermingle unless you had to. On Friday, October 7th, 1983, in Griffin, Georgia, 23-year-old Timothy, who would go by Tim, and his younger sister Talisa, who's just 2 years younger than him, went out to their favorite club called the People's Choice, which was a predominantly black club. Everyone in town said that club was lit, and some nights it would be over 100 people in that club. But when Tim and Talisa first get inside, Talisa goes to the bathroom and Tim goes straight to the dance floor. But when Talisa came back from the bathroom, she couldn't find her brother anywhere. Someone told her they saw him dancing with some white woman, and every once in a while there would be a few white girls inside of that club, but dancing with them was not always accepted at the time. Some time goes by and Talisa finds out some white men was looking for Tim in the club. She then finds out that Tim left the club with the white woman he was dancing with and those two white men that was looking for him in the club. But by the time Talisa got to the front door, Tim was already gone. On October 8th, the following morning at 4 a.m., Talisa gets home, but her brother wasn't there yet. It was normal for Tim to leave and be gone for 2 or 3 days, then come back home and everything would be okay. So Tim not being home at that moment didn't worry Talisa. But on October 9th, just 2 days after Timothy left the club with those two white men and that white woman, some hunters came across a body of a young black man close to what they call the hanging tree. He had been stabbed over 30 times and all he had on was pants and underwear, and those were pulled down below his thighs. Police officer Oscar Jordan, who worked at the Spalding County Sheriff's Department, went to the crime scene. He said it was the grossest thing he had ever seen. There were drag marks from the road into the field, and on those drag marks, which were tire marks, was a sweater that had been pulled inside out. So it appeared that this person had been chained to the back of a truck and dragged him around feet first into a square pattern, and there was blood at each corner of that square. There was blood about 2 inches deep inside of the dirt. They think at some point Tim was told to get out of the car, and that's when he was hit with some type of a club across his head. There was one stab wound to his knee. They think that was done so that he wouldn't be able to run. Detectives collected any evidence they could, including his pants. Now remember this, they took his pants for evidence because we're going to come back to that later. But there was a Jack Daniels whiskey bottle and a wooden table leg with black electrical tape around it collected as evidence. They're thinking that that's maybe what they hit him in the head with. But there was no knife found, being that he was stabbed. Investigator Oscar Jordan, who was the police, was then put on as the investigator to try to find out who committed this crime. Now, Oscar is a black man, and he said there was no trust between the black police and the white police or the investigators. He said there was a lot of tension in the office, there was a lot of fear, and they wouldn't talk to each other. Oscar showed a picture of Tim around town to many people, and he even took it to the People's Choice Club. Now, Tim was friends with the owner of the club, and he would go there occasionally to clean up things, and he would pick up a lot of different random jobs to do there. So people knew him there. And a detective with the City of Griffin Police Department, who was always at that club, recognized the man in the picture as Timothy Coggins. After this information, Oscar then shows the picture to Timothy's family, and Tim's sister identified the man as her brother, Timothy Coggins. You can only imagine how the family was feeling at this moment. On October 9th, Oscar went to the morgue to see Timothy's body. He notices Tim's skull had been crushed in and he had 7 stab wounds to his chest in these 11-inch slices. The stab marks were in the shape of an X. That was supposed to be indicated as the Confederate flag. The autopsy report says Tim was hit across the head, dragged, and stabbed multiple times, and that he was alive when they left him in the field. Oscar was trying to figure out if anyone knew the white woman he was dancing with at the club, but no one knew who she was or who he left with. But it was said there was a group of white men standing across the street from the club that night. And the reason why Tim left with these men so easily is because he knew these men, and unfortunately, that would be the last time anyone would see Timothy Coggins alive. Some neighbors said Tim was trying desperately to get some money and that he and his friend Danny were given $600 to go buy weed for these 2 white men, but instead they ran off with the money. Danny was unalived about 3 weeks before Tim was unalived, and that really scared Tim because even though Danny's death was said to be an accident, Tim didn't believe it. It said Tim had until Thursday to come up with the money, and he went to the club on Friday. So the investigator, Oscar, takes all this information back to the sheriff, and he tells the sheriff they don't just have 1 homicide, they have 2. He's thinking whoever did this to Danny did it to Tim because they owed these guys some money. But now Oscar gets this call to go to some place called Carrie's Trailer Park. And this white woman named Sandra Bunn lived there, and she was bragging about what happened to Tim. People heard her saying how this N-word was chained behind a truck and how he was dragged in a field. Investigators confronted her, and she tells them the night of the murder, she saw her brother, Franklin Gebhardt, and his girlfriend, Mickey Guy, and their friend, Bill Moore, and Timothy get into Bill's truck and take off. I couldn't find a picture of Mickey Guy, so I'm not sure what she looks like, but she was a white woman. But Sandra says she saw them driving towards the hanging tree, and at this point, Oscar started to believe that Franklin and Bill were suspects in Tim's death. And when he started to make that known and told everyone at the police department, Oscar was pulled off the case. Oscar says that the sheriff told him, "Thank you, but we won't be needing your assistance anymore." And he was then put on traffic duty. So all this is a cover-up. The police was involved. The KKK was the police. So they were trying to cover up and protect these white men. They knew what went down, but the black man was getting way too close on solving this case, and they couldn't have that. This could have been solved within like 3 weeks, but instead, the case was turned over to a white police officer. Then Franklin goes and tells the new investigator he was at his girlfriend's house that whole night, and his girlfriend, Mickey Guy, backs that story up. And they never even questioned Bill Moore. After Oscar was taken off the case, Timothy's family received many death threats, and a brick was thrown through their window with the words, "Hush, or you're next." On December 26, 1983, 3 months after Tim's murder, they closed his case. And that was extremely fast. And so the case went cold. Fast forward to the year 2016, 33 years after Tim's death, and that's when his file was handed over to Jared Coleman, a new investigator on the job. He had just had this job for 2 years with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. And that's when Tim's family was finally able to have some hope with this whole thing. This new investigator starts going over Tim's file, and he went back to the original witness statement that said Franklin Gebhardt bragged about unaliving Tim. He thought Franklin saying he was at his girlfriend Mickey Guy's house that night Tim was unalived was questionable because there was never any further follow-up to confirm this. And they never even questioned Bill Moore. There was allegations that Mickey Guy had a relationship with Timothy Coggins. At the same time, she was in a relationship with Franklin Gebhardt. And people did also say they saw Tim leave with some white men. Franklin's sister Sandra Bunn said she saw Mickey and her brother at the trailer park along with Bill Moore and Timothy Coggins. So all this information is in Tim's file, and this new investigator is putting all the pieces together. So Jared, the new investigator, went to talk to Mickey Guy to ask her about that night, but she had already passed away. But Bill Moore was alive, so they were able to speak to him. And when they did, Bill said he doesn't know anything. In April of 2017, 4 months after the Coggins case was reopened, they interviewed Franklin, who was 59 years old at the time in 2017. Franklin was already incarcerated in the Spalding County Jail on a separate case that involved sexual assault. When he's asked about Timothy Coggins, right away he says he doesn't know anything. Then he gets asked about Mickey Guy and if she was cheating on him with Tim. Franklin immediately gets mad and says, "You're saying my girlfriend was sleeping with the N-word?" He goes on to say he doesn't know Timothy and that Timothy should have been minding his own business. But if you don't know Tim, why are you so mad? So now at this point, after that interview, investigators knew this was a crime of passion, especially due to all of the stab wounds that was in Tim's body and because of the way his body was desecrated. So they needed to find evidence that would still be able to be preserved. And the investigators' first thought was Tim's pants. But once they started looking for his pants, they noticed that they were missing. And at this point, they knew someone was hiding something. The investigator explained the case to Daryl Dix, who was a new sheriff at the Spalding Police Department, and together they were trying to track down evidence that was missing. So they looked and looked, but his pants were still not found. But they did find this black diary. The diary belonged to a former sheriff deputy named Foskey. And while going through the diary, they found out that the KKK's involvement with the Spalding's Sheriff Department and the Griffin Police Department may have had some type of role in the case being closed. An entry written in the diary on Wednesday, May 19, 1982 said, "While leaving the Experiment Cafe, Deputy Stan asked me if I would join the Klan. Johnny, the owner of the cafe, said, 'You are making the best move of your life. It's about time white people stood up for their rights and put a stop to all this N-word shit.'" Johnny stated he had a number of good Klan in the police and sheriff's department, and that same police would be investigating Tim's murder the following year. While still going over the case, they noticed the name Christopher Vaughn mentioned many times. He had written letters to the Spalding County Police Department saying he had information about the Coggins murder and that he wanted to talk to an investigator, but no one ever listened to him. Chris wrote the letters from prison in 2004, and 21 years after Tim's murder at the time, while he was serving time for a child molestation conviction. It took the Georgia Bureau of Internal Investigation 3 years to interview him. Chris was one of the people who found Tim's body when he was just 10 years old. And on April 25, 2007, he was finally interviewed, and he said he was around Bill and Franklin as a child, and he heard from their mouth they unalived Tim and bragged about it. Chris said he never heard anything about Tim stealing any money from Franklin, but instead he says Franklin had another motive, which was when Franklin heard Mickey was cheating on him with Tim. And that's when Franklin and Bill went to the People's Choice nightclub and told Tim to come with them. They tell Tim, "Come on, come with us. We're going to have a good time. We're going to party and do some drugs." So that's when Tim left with Bill, Franklin, and Mickey. And that brings me back to when I said before that Tim knew these guys, and that's why he left with them so easily. At the trailer park where Mickey and Chris lived, Chris said he walked out the back of his trailer and saw Tim and Franklin having an argument about Tim sleeping with Mickey. He said he saw them get into a truck and drive toward Mentor Road. And Mentor Road is where Tim's body was found. He said over the years, he heard Franklin brag about unaliving Tim. So now investigators knew they had to find the murder weapon. They knew a knife was involved, but that no knife was ever found. But Christopher told them he heard Franklin say he threw the knife in the well that was on his property and that he had thrown other things of Tim's inside of that well also. In hopes to getting Franklin to talk, investigators asked Chris for help since Chris and Franklin were locked up together at the Spalding County Detention Center. They were able to get a search warrant in order to put a wire in the jail cell. Chris and Franklin were able to meet up and talk, and while they were talking, Chris tells Franklin that the police asked him about the knife he put down the well. Franklin replies with, "What effing well?" Chris says, "The well behind the house." But during this whole conversation, Franklin never admitted to it, but he never denied it either. But with the statement they had from Chris, they were able to get a search warrant on the well. And to prove the case, they needed something physical the jury could see, because they were really trying to take them to court and arrest them. So the police and investigators got a company in town to go to the well. The company then shoots high pressure water down the well and it vacuums stuff up into a tanker truck. It took them all day, and a shoe eventually comes out that belonged to Tim. And they also find a handle of a knife. And remember, they knew a knife was involved, but they could never find it. They found a stick sticking out of the mud with the white shirt on it. The shirt had stab marks, and the marks lined up perfectly with the stab marks that was on Tim's body. And they were also able to find Tim's pants, and that was enough evidence to go to court. On October 13th, 2007, Sheriff Daryl Dix asked the original investigator on the case, Oscar Jordan, to come out of retirement to make the arrest of Franklin, who was 59, and Bill, who was 58 at the time. They finally get arrested after all these years, and on June 18th, 2018, 34 and a half years after Timothy Coggins' murder, they're in court and they go over how gruesome this murder was, mentioning the 30 stab wounds, multiple lacerations to the body, his teeth was knocked out, and he had a Confederate flag engraved in his chest with a knife. He was dragged from behind a pickup truck and left alone in a field while they bragged about it. Franklin was tried first and showed no emotion during the trial. The jury came to the conclusion that he was guilty of malice murder and felony murder and was sentenced to life plus 30 years in prison. Sandra Bunn, the woman who lived at the trailer park, and her son, Lamar Bunn, who was a Milner police officer, was charged with obstruction, and Spalding Sheriff Detention Police Officer Gregory Huffman was also charged with obstruction in violation of oath of office. He was later fired. Bill Moore was also convicted of felony murder and malice murder, but he was able to make a plea bargain down to manslaughter. He died in October of 2021, only 3 years into his 20-year sentence. Tim's family had a memorial service for him after the conviction, something they did not do 34 years earlier. They did have a funeral for him, but they weren't able to mourn him in the way that they wanted to the fact that they didn't even put a headstone on his grave because they were afraid of it being desecrated. So after this conviction that didn't happen until 34 and a half years later, they finally did put a headstone on his grave that says, "Gone but not forgotten." The fact that this happened in 1983 and no one got arrested until 2018 is absolutely wild, and it shows just how black people are treated in this system, but may he rest in peace. But let me know your thoughts on this case down in the comments so we can talk about it, and if you haven't already and want to see more videos like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.